Hello. Welcome to the presentation. Today we'll be discussing an important topic in JavaScript, that is interactive events and buttons. So let's start. In the world of web development, interactivity plays a pivotal role. It's the element that transforms static web pages into dynamic experiences. JavaScript, as a client-side scripting language, empowers us to breathe life into web pages. Let's delve into why it is the language of choice for adding interactivity to web pages. The first point is client-side scripting in JavaScript. So client-side scripting, facilitated by JavaScript, it involves running code directly within a user's web browser, right? So this approach reduces the need for continuous server requests and allows for real-time interactions. So JavaScript empowers the developers to create an interactive elements, validate forms, and perform client-side data processing, which results in a more responsive and interactive user experience. The second point is dynamic and responsive web pages. So JavaScript's role in creating dynamic and responsive web pages is again pivotal. It enables the websites to adapt user actions, offering immediate feedback and updates. Through event handling and document object manipulation, the JavaScript allows for content changes and visual effects, making web applications feel more engaging and user-centric, right? The third point is cross-browser compatibility. Achieving cross-browser compatibility in JavaScript ensures that the web applications work consistently across various web browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge, etc. So JavaScript developers must write code that adheres to web standards and account for browser-specific behaviors. The cross-browser compatibility broadens the accessibility and ensures a good user experience irrespective of the browser used, right? Let's talk about some advantages of JavaScript. Mm. However, there are several advantages of JavaScript, but we have focused on some important and some good advantages of JavaScript. The first one is reduced server load. So JavaScript can reduce server load by handling tasks on the client side, right? For example, the form validation can be done in the browser, which minimizes the need to send data to the server for validation, which is a good thing. This results in quicker responses, less server processing, and improved overall performance. Creating dynamic content. JavaScript allows for the creation of dynamic content on the web pages. So through document object manipulation and event handling, the content can be modified, added, or removed in response to the user actions. This dynamic nature of JavaScript enhances user engagement and ensures that the content is tailored to individual preferences. Animation and transition. JavaScript is instrumental. JavaScript is so instrumental in bringing the interactivity and enhancing the user experience. We have been discussing it again and again and again, right? So JavaScript is instrumental in creating animations and transitions on the web pages. So it enables smooth transition between page elements, interactive effects also it brings, and animated user experiences. So what it does is it adds a visually appealing and engaging dimension to the websites, which enhance user experience and make the content more memorable. Improved user experience. JavaScript significantly contributes to an improved user experience. It allows for real-time validation, feedback, and interactivity, which makes the web application feel responsive and intuitive, which is the one of the most important aspects of a good web application, we can say. Now let's discuss the most and the sole topic of our discussion today, which is creating buttons. It is essential for us to understand that the HTML or hypertext markup language lays the foundation for web pages. HTML provides us the straightforward way to create interactive elements. One of the most commonly used element to bring interactive is the button element. This is the HTML code for creating buttons, right? We can simply use the button element to get started. But we can take this step further by customizing buttons with attributes. In two ways we can customize these attributes. One is the ID attribute and other one is the class attribute, right? Here is the syntax of how we can do this. ID equals to my button. So this is an attribute called ID with a value of my button. The ID attribute uniquely identifies this button within the HTML document. So we can use this ID to select and manipulate the button with JavaScript. We'll be using this ID in the JavaScript code later. The second one is class attribute. Class equals to custom button. This is an attribute called class with a value of custom button. The class attribute allows us to assign one or more class to the element. So in this case, the button is given the class named custom button. We can use this class to select and style the button with CSS, or we can manipulate it with JavaScript as well, which we will be doing. Now, where we place our JavaScript code matters. In two ways we can do this also. First, we can directly include it in the head section, right? In this way. In the head section, we have included the script tag in which our JavaScript code will come. Alternatively, and preferably, which we should go for the second way, which is we should place it at the end of body section, just before closing the body tag, like this, right? Now let's talk about event listeners. Event listeners, what are they? What are event listeners? So event listeners are JavaScript functions that patiently wait for specific events to occur on an HTML element. So event listeners in JavaScript acts as a good observers basically, which attentively monitor designated HTML elements for particular events, such as clicks, hovers, or keyboard actions. There are several types of event listeners. When the specified event unfolds on the element, the associated event listener springs into action, which executes a predefined JavaScript function. So this responsive behavior allows the developers to craft interactive and engaging user experiences. How the event listeners are used. These event listeners are attached to HTML elements using JavaScript. Event listeners are linked to HTML elements through JavaScript code by selecting the desired HTML element and specifying the event to watch for. So the developers establish this connection. When the event occurs on the element, the attached event listener executes a predefined function which enables responses to user actions and enhance the interactivity of web pages. Let's take a simple example, right? Suppose we have an HTML button and we want to respond when the user clicks it. So this is the HTML code for a button with ID as my button and button name is click me, right? Now while writing the JavaScript code, this is the JavaScript code. So this line, the const button equals document.getElementById my button, This line of code selects an HTML element by its ID using the document.getElementById method, right? Here the my button which is mentioned here, it is the ID for button click me, right? So basically we are selecting click me button through its ID my button. Button.add event listener, this line of code attaches an event listener to the button element. And event listeners are what? Basically event listeners are used to respond to events such as user interactions with the web page, right? And here we have used the event listener as click, right? So click is the type of event to listen for. In this case, click occurs when the user clicks the button, right? Function is an anonymous function that contains the code to be executed when the click event occurs, right? So whatever code is inside the function will be executed when we click on the button, right? When the click event will occur, the entire code inside the function will run. So let's discuss the type of events now. There are rich variety of events that bring web pages to life. So let's explore some of the commonly used event types and how they can be leveraged to enhance user experience. Right, the first one is click event, as we have discussed seconds before, right? So click event is one of the most fundamental type of events. It occurs when a user clicks an element like a button, link or image. Hover event takes place when a user hovers their mouse cursor over an element like an image or navigation. Key press event. The key press event occurs when a key on the keyboard is pressed. It is especially useful for web forms and applications that rely on keyboard input. Some more are there. Scroll event, focus and blur event. The focus and blur events. Focus events are activated when an element gains focus, typically when a user clicks or taps into a form field. And blur event occurs when a focus leaves an element, right? That is when a user clicks outside of a form field. These are just a few examples of event types that means there are several types of event listeners that enhance the user experience. So let's take a short example where we'll be implementing whatever we have discussed in the earlier sections, right? So these are the HTML and CSS code snippets for a counter app that we'll be making. Now counter app is basically an app, we can say, or a web page which takes the input number and performs the desired operations or performs some specific operations on the number when we perform the click event, right? So here we will be creating buttons and we will be adding event listeners as well. So let's start. So this is the HTML code, right? Here is the head section of the HTML document where all the styles and document title are specified, right? The title, as we can see, it is the counter app. Body section of the HTML element contains all the visible content of the web page, right? H1 is the heading tag which displays the heading with the text counter app. Now we can see the button element. The first button element is with ID increment button. What it does, it generates a button with ID increment button that allows users to increment the counter. The second one is decrement button, which creates another button with ID decrement button to decrement the counter. And the third one is reset, which generates another button with reset button ID to reset the counter to its initial value, right? Now as we can see, there is a tag script tag which contains src and a file name script.js. This file name is nothing but the name of the file of the name of our JavaScript file, which will be linking with the HTML to perform or to get the desired output from our application. This is the CSS code snippet to provide styling instructions for elements on a web page, right? The body selector targets the entire body of web page. Font family Arial specifies the font family to be used for text, right? Text align center, it centers the text and other inline elements within the body horizontally. Padding 20px. So what it does is it adds 20 pixels of padding to all sides of the body, which creates the space between content and edges of the browser window. H1 selector targets the H1 element, which is the counter app heading, right, which typically represents the main heading of main web page. Cursor pointer, what is this? It is basically what it does is it changes the cursor to a hand pointer when hovering over the buttons, indicating that they are clickable, right? The button hover is the selector that targets the button elements when they are hovered over with the mouse. So this is the CSS code. Now let's proceed further. This is the JavaScript code snippet that adds functionality to a counter app, which corresponds to the HTML and CSS in the last slide as we have seen. Now let's see this code. So here the counter element, increment button, decrement button and the reset button are the variables that store references to HTML element with specific IDs. So these references are obtained using document.getElementById. Okay. The counter element references the element with ID counter, which is where the counter value will be displayed, right? The increment button references the button with ID increment button, which is used to increment the counter. The decrement button variable references the button with ID decrement button, which is used to decrement the counter. And the reset button variable references the button with ID reset button, which is used to reset the counter to its initial value. Now as we can see, there are 3 event listeners mentioned here. Each is of type click, right? So first is increment button dot event listener, add event listener, click. This event listener, what it does, it listens for a click event on the increment button, and when clicked it executes the arrow function which increments the counter by 1 and then calls the update counter function to update the displayed value. Update counter function is what? Update counter is a function that updates the text content of the counter element and reflects the current value of counter variable. Like after clicking on the increment button or decrement button or reset button at a time, the update counter basically takes the current value of counter and displays it to the user, right? Similarly, we have taken the decrement button dot event listener type, add event listener as click. So this listens for the click event on the decrement button, and when clicked it executes the arrow function which checks if the counter is greater than 0 before decrementing it by 1 and updating the displayed value with update counter. Similarly, the reset button dot add event listener is the event listener which listens for the click event on the reset button and it resets the number to its initial value, right? So let's integrate the HTML, CSS and JavaScript code together and see how the output looks like, right? So the output goes this way. First, initially we have taken 0 as the number, right? Now when we are incrementing it, the it is incrementing the value by 1. The decrementing button decrements the value by 1, and reset button sets the number to its initial value. Secondly, we take 4 as the initial number and perform all the 3 operations, and as we can see, when we are clicking, it is working. So this was the most basic example of creating buttons and events in JavaScript. We can use these events and buttons to add interactivity, to enhance the user experience, right? And make interactive web pages and applications. So I hope I was able to explain the topic. Thanks for being there. Have a good day.